So I've been reading a lot of Golden Age comics lately. Your Action Comics, your Captain America comics, your Captain Marvel comics, your Young Romance comics. And what struck me about each of them, other than the horrible amounts of racism, is that they're very different from what a traditional comic book today is. First off, these books are far longer than modern comics. Most cap out at around 52 pages, including ads, and are an anthology containing around maybe 5 or 6 different stories, each with a different character and genre, such as Western, sci-fi, historical fiction, sports, or just gags. Modern comics are dominated by one genre, are usually 22 pages, and contain on average one story, not including the occasional short where Gorilla Grodd is stopped with the Snickers. But you know what's even weirder? Way over here, modern Japan is still doing virtually everything those old comics were doing, but amped up to 11. That's right. We're talking about manga! Please don't go. Okay, so I say manga resembles a more amped up version of the traditional Golden Age comic. What exactly do I mean? Well, Doug, let's break down what it's like buying a manga versus buying a traditional comic book. Manga is distributed like a magazine. Let's say you want the latest chapter of Naruto. Well, in order to get that, you have to buy a copy of Weekly Shonen Jump, an anthology magazine that comes out every week and contains not just that single chapter of Naruto, but also other hit series like One Piece, Bleach, Dragon Ball, My Hero Academia, Haikyuu, Bakuman, and so many others covering a wide range of genres, all for the low price of just $3. And just like comics, if you don't want to buy a whole magazine, then you have the option to just wait around for the chapters to be collected into graphic novel format and sold at bookstores. Okay, so now that we know all that, what would happen if the modern comics industry just decided to suddenly copy Shonen Jump's format wholesale? In the West, our sequential art is traditionally spread out, with each series headlining their own magazine. What's more, if we look at the genre juggernaut that is superhero comics, you'll notice that the creator of a series might not be who's currently drawing and writing it. And that person might move to a completely different series after a while and quickly be replaced by someone else. This is in strong contrast to manga, which might have multiple sibling publications, but usually keeps its stories all in one place, and is very much dependent on the series creators. You never see Dragon Ball getting written by someone other than Akira Toriyama. Okay, bad example. But here's a better one. I want you to imagine Superman. Now tell me, which Superman did you imagine? Was it this one? That one? What about this one? No matter which Superman you pictured, it's still Superman, regardless of the actor or artist portraying him. Compare that with Son Goku, who, regardless of what form he takes, is always depicted in the same distinct Toriyama style. To put it in perspective, imagine the Justice League not drawn like this, but drawn like this. And yes, even in non-canon crossovers, this rule still holds true. Speaking of big shared universe crossovers, let's talk about Marvel Comics. The closest thing Japan has to Marvel's iconic shared universe are the various tokusatsu shows which have been airing since the 60s. For manga, it's much rarer. Even stories created by the same people rarely go any further than a tongue-in-cheek reference. It can happen, though more often it's in the form of spin-offs like My Hero Academia Vigilantes, or continuations like Dragon Ball Super. A fully realized shared universe manga magazine would have some pretty interesting features that would be unthinkable in traditional Weekly Shonen Jump. With Western comic books, if a series isn't doing well, then it gets cancelled. But if a character is popular enough, or just fills a certain role, then they'll show up in some other series. They might even garner enough popularity to get their old series renewed. Manga doesn't really have anything like that. Once a series is cancelled, that's usually it. We never see those characters or that world again. When it comes to approving, renewing, and canceling a series, Weekly Shonen Jump is brutal. If a series is underperforming in any way, then the editors will swiftly cancel it and replace it with something new. It'd be like if... Let's see, what do normal people watch? Yu-Gi-Oh! You know Yu-Gi-Oh, right? There we go. Imagine if Yu-Gi-Oh's series got cancelled and then one day he just showed up in Cowboy Bebop. It's cool, but how does this work? Now that we've got the shared universe stuff out of the way, let's continue to talk about the specs. We've got your long runner. Your gag comic, that's probably going to outlast all of these. The worldwide phenomenon. That sleeper hit you should really read. Some experimental stuff. Some spin-offs. And then everything else. All under one single title. Oh, and there's suddenly a lot less color in your comics. Coloring takes time, coordination, and money. This isn't very practical if you're publishing over 2 million copies of a magazine that has an average of 440 pages on a weekly basis. Shonen Jump will add color for the occasional new series or just special occasions, but it's nowhere near the level of Western comics. In fact, Western comics can confirm that making a full-color comics anthology isn't practical. DC's Action Comics Weekly was a 48-page color comic that ran weekly in the 80s, and it supposedly sold pretty well, but it was a major headache for the publisher and eventually was canceled because the strain was just too much. And now I think it's time to answer the question that you've all been asking, but I have yet to answer. Which one is better? While this video was intended to be just a comparative analysis rather than a versus match, if I had to pick one, manga just has more to offer. I mean, I didn't even cover half the genres in the medium, most of which are self-contained stories with a relative amount of creative freedom and don't have to worry about 50 different continuities. I mean, I love superhero books with all my heart, but even I'll admit that I can get genre fatigue, and these books just don't... Wait a minute. It was staring me in the face this whole time. I made a mistake that so many people make about comic books. I assumed that they could just be about superheroes, but they don't have to be. They can be about so much more. Sure, comics have a lot of superheroes, but even Marvel and DC don't depend on just Batman and Spider-Man. Jedi aren't really superheroes, yet Marvel's licensed Star Wars book still far outsold superhero comics in the millions. Neil Gaiman's Sandman takes place in the DC universe, but it's still more a high-concept fantasy than a superhero comic. And it only gets crazier from there. Outside of the big two, we've got a lot more unique genres: autobiographical, classical, medical, and whatever the hell American-born Chinese is. Sure, it's not the same level of massive genre diversity that manga has, but you know what? It's in color.